I'm so happy to be sitting down with you. Thank you so much. So I think some people in this room are very familiar with you. Others are not. I was reading before I came here this story that I think I had read last year, but a longtime reporter, Adam Mashinsky, had profiled you last year. And I just wanted to share what he wrote, which is that it is no understatement to say that Yelp's fingerprints, and therefore Lowe's, have been on every major effort to rein in big tech for more than a decade. In antitrust circles, Lowe has earned a reputation for both marshaling allegations of abuse by the biggest tech players and suggesting remedies to rein them in. This is great. He was instrumental, for example, in lobbying the EU's then antitrust chief, Margareta Vestager, I'm sure I'm mangling her name, to bring charges against Google in 2015, resulting in a guilty verdict 2 years later. You're on a first-name basis, Adam said, with members of Congress behind reform in Washington, and a persistent thorn in the side of big tech. Accurate?
Yeah. I'm pro little tech. I feel like I'm maybe less, slightly less caustic and aggro than I was in wearing my last hat, but still care a lot about what, that whether or not little tech companies are fairly represented in places like Washington and Brussels.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously there are people in this audience who have that same concern. I did want to ask really quickly, this story talks about how American law has long favored improved products over protecting failed competitors, which we saw, Lena talking a little bit about. I mean, they've had to sort of come up with new ways to decide whether or not something's a monopoly. So Google was improving its offerings for a long time, and the FTC was sort of like, okay, well, they're offering great stuff, so that's that. You started persuading people who matter that the problem is that Google's growing power harms consumers by degrading their competitors' products, which I thought was a pretty smart take. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Actually, in that case, the study that was done, and I think what's interesting is that you can see all kinds of examples across all the major gatekeepers these days of this, is that when you have dominance, when you have, basically you get a monopoly, congratulations, and now you are sort of scanning the landscape and looking for adjacent markets to enter, and how can you sort of unfairly use some kind of edge to snuff out competitors. And so, as you and Chair Khan spoke about, the lens, at least for the last 40 years, before the Biden administration kind of came in and brought some fresh thinking into it, was very oriented around consumer pricing. And it turns out that you can, with these gatekeepers, you can actually see very often the gatekeeper is degrading quality, and so that becomes the proxy for a price increase. So even though the product is quote unquote free, if they are degrading the quality, then you can kind of swap that for a consumer price increase in a consumer welfare analysis. And that was the basis of a paper that Tim Wu and Professor Michael Luca did in 2015 that really was kind of the linchpin of a lot of Yelp's arguments. It basically was like, look, ultimately when they put their thumb on the scale, they're not just hurting competitors. It wasn't competitor degradation. It was actually they were degrading their own product and hurting consumers. So in other words, if you did a search for pediatrician in New York City, instead of seeing services like ZocDoc, RateMDs, Health Grades, services that had hundreds and hundreds of reviews for that type of query, you would be getting, a handful of reviews from Google. And that kind of self-dealing, again, is just pernicious across all these dominant platforms.
Are any of those brands still in business?
ZocDoc, I believe, is. ZocDoc's headquartered in New York. I haven't really kept up with the medical local search space. But
just names I haven't heard in a long time. Well, I will say, and I hope this doesn't sound offensive, but I am amazed that you stayed so long with Yelp, which is no shrinking violet, but not a power player and has sort of credibility issues of its own. And I'm sure that the big tech companies were trying to pull you in as a lobbyist for them. Why stay so long?
I'm really proud of what in my old hat, again, just here with my new hat on, but really proud of what Yelp's mission was and what we did there in terms of helping, I think, Adam Lashinsky's piece, is accurate, that there are inflection points along the way over the last decade plus, looking at the kind of anti-big tech backlash. We were part of it along the way, and I think helping shift the conversation, it made it feel like I'm not just showing up to work to do this, help improve local search results. It's like shifting the conversation about economic justice, concentration in our economy, and so it ended up being much bigger kind of mission, and I really kind of relish that. And there were very few things that I would even consider leaving for, which is why I'm like so thrilled to kind of have upgraded from a speedboat to an armada.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was going to ask if you thought you'd find, or you are finding, a bigger audience for Y Combinator. I mean, in Silicon Valley, it is, the 800-pound gorilla on the startup scene. How is it perceived here? The same way?
I mean, I was actually going to kind of take a step back and explain that, what Y Combinator is,
Yeah,
because
go
a lot of
ahead.
folks in Washington D.C.,
Don't
that
know.
part of my role is about kind of YC 101, because so many folks in D.C. don't actually know what it is. Essentially, it started is the original accelerator. It started back in 2005. Paul Graham and who had successfully sold a company in the 90s and was sort of helping founders by writing essays and avoiding pitfalls for people who were thinking about doing technology startups. Created this program. He had a call for applications. 12 people got in, moved to Cambridge, Mass. For the summer. Of that class, Reddit and Twitch were born, and it just kept going and growing. And now, basically, the way it works is if you and I had a cool idea, we could apply. There's about a 1% acceptance rate. You give up about 10% roughly equity. You get $500,000 in funding, and you move to San Francisco now is where it's anchored, and you for about 12 weeks. And you're just get intensive mentoring, and you're getting that kind of 0 to 1 product market fit. And what's been the most surprising thing with the new role is how many in Washington don't even know it exists. And you think about, we've now seeded 5,000 companies, have 11,000 founders in our network. Like, that is just an insane impact for the U.S. technology economy. And so trying to educate policymakers about that impact and how we touch virtually every congressional district in the United States, that's been a big part of my kind of early work.
You could wear like a T-shirt every time you show up with somebody. Airbnb, Coinbase, Dropbox.
Exactly.
Reddit. Well, I was going to ask then what people make of Gary Tan, who is the president. So Gary is a longtime, he was partner with YC, he's been an entrepreneur, he's back at YC as the president. The most courteous, even-keeled guy in the world to talk with, but very combative on social media. And so I just was wondering what people think of him, because I think people in San Francisco are like, what's going on? It's,
I mean, Gary,
for better or worse.
I really love Gary because I met Gary back in 2022, and he was the only venture capitalist at the time that was putting his neck out for this legislation called the American Innovation Choice Online Act. It was introduced by Klobuchar and Grassley, and basically the bill would have curbed the most egregious forms of self-preferencing by the largest gatekeeping companies. And I think there's a lot of reasons. The investors, kind of that community, will sit on its hands for those questions. Sometimes it's almost like a social capture, or sometimes it's like folks are libertarian, or they have different political views about like the role of the government and stuff. But I was really impressed with his leadership on that. We sort of hit it off and stayed in touch. And then when he came into the YC role, got coffee, and basically, within six months or so, he invited me to come be part of the team. And so I love Gary. You're not going to get me to say anything, but he's a mensch, and is. I agree with what you've said. He is. Interpersonally, he's like so warm, and is just. He was out in Washington a few weeks ago, and like off of a red eye, was just like going nonstop until about 11 p.m. And it sometimes has some spicy tweets.
Yeah, no. I guess I just wondered if it's a strategy. I mean, attention is good, and he's been getting a lot of attention, and it seems just, I guess, sort of unlike him historically. So I thought it was sort of an interesting, path he's been taking. Anyway, we'll move on. So my understanding is that you have a three-pronged approach here to helping startups find more breathing room. And that is access to talent, access to markets, and access to AI, which the latter part means you like for AI to be open sourced so that, again, like we've been talking about all night, it's not just the big companies that are controlling and benefiting from this tech. On the talent piece, the FTC just adopted this non-compete rule. For us in California, it has less impact because we've had this sort of regulation in place, but everywhere else, it seems like a very big deal. Are you happy with the look of that? It protects everybody except for senior executives in a policy role that make over $150,000, right?
I think that the non-competes rule was great. We thought it was a good move by the FTC. Look, we would be happy if Congress did something as well, but we'll see. Part of the issue is in Washington, you have such just pernicious influence by the most powerful, largest companies, and really there's been a vacuum for the voice of these smaller companies, and that's really what we're trying to fill. I would love for Congress to tackle non-competes as a federal legislation, but I just frankly don't see it happening just because of that pernicious influence. Open source AI is so critically important, making sure that people can build on these models without fear that they're going to have to register with some kind of safety commission. Like, we're still in very, very nascent stages of these tools, and we want to make sure that ultimately this field is very competitive, and we don't want just a handful of companies to control the entire kind of LLM innovations. And so access to markets has to do with basically ensuring that we have robust competition in the United States, supporting strong enforcement of against companies that are egregiously self-preferencing. Access to talent has everything to do with immigration, making sure that talented people can get into the United States. And unfortunately, and that's actually an example of how, you asked about, like, am I still a thorn in big tech's side? I mean, that's a great example of how, we cooperate with the larger tech companies, because the entire technology industry is affected. So those are kind of the big themes. I've noticed the job has also involved a lot of kind of white glove federal bureaucracy navigation. There's some tax issues like Section 174. Basically, we've abruptly started sort of pulled the rug on founders who are trying to deduct their R&D expenses. They can no longer do that. That has to be amortized over many years. It's somewhat esoteric, but it's really, really important for these tiny companies.
I was going to say I need to learn more about that. I did wonder, so we talked about, you talked fleetingly about immigration. It seems like such an intractable problem because Congress really doesn't want to disentangle high-skilled immigration from illegal immigration, meaning, as it relates to the border, and that's obviously a political grenade. Are there other things that could be done other than non-competes and high-skilled immigration? Another issue that we're seeing all the time in Silicon Valley is just with regard to access to talent is how much these companies are paying these college graduates and people working at startups. I mean, it's very hard for a startup to compete if Google says, here's $3 million to start with plus equity. I mean, has anybody ever talked about capping these salary packages, or is that just completely bananas, would never happen?
I think the reason that you have to look at why this is such an exciting time to build something that people want. And that is because the reason that Google or OpenAI or whoever is throwing these seven-figure salaries at these young people is because they know that's the competition, that they can walk and with either by themselves or with a co-founder go build something, and that has a strong likelihood of being worth a whole lot more. And so that's the market. I don't know if like throttling salaries is gonna solve it. I think it's actually ultimately a good signal because it means they are fearful that people are going to go off and build on this new wave of technology.
Can I ask quickly, what is YC's relationship with OpenAI? Because in some ways it was kind of partly incubated at YC. The former president, Sam Altman, was at YC when he was transitioning over to OpenAI. He's still running OpenAI. Is it contentious? What's, you have a stake in the company, so it's a little bit complicated.
I started at YC in October, so I've never met Sam, but like my read is that folks are still friends and whatnot. There's he led the organization Sam led the organization for many years, and it was sort of in some ways sort of spun out of Y Combinator. And Paul Graham has tweeted a decent amount about this to dispel some of the myths. Many of our companies are like about half of so every year now we're doing about 250 companies per batch. So every 6 months, 250 companies. So every year, 500 companies. And half of those companies are AI. And a lot of those companies are building on OpenAI. So I think that's, I think that reflects there is a strong relationship. There's a lot of former YC folks that are in OpenAI. Once every couple of weeks, I'm exchanging emails with them and corresponding with them on an issue. So there might be issues where we don't totally see eye to eye, maybe on when it comes to these open source debates. But frankly, I think all this stuff is so early that it's hard to like diagnose that I think the relationship is fine.
Well, I guess I was just thinking, it makes your position sort of hard to articulate because you do have these companies that are building on OpenAI. OpenAI says, look, we're only keeping it closed because of safety concerns. We just want to make sure we're building this responsibly. And on the other side, you're telling people it's got to be open source or these companies, startups can't thrive. So it's a little bit hard to square.
I think we just want maximum options for founders. So you don't want a system where, look, if OpenAI is providing, I use OpenAI almost on a daily basis. I think that people, founders, if they find that GPT-4 and later iterations are the right tool to build on, that's great, and we encourage that. We also think that founders need to have the option to be able to build on Mistral, Llama, all the other open source tools, because that perhaps can provide maybe cost savings. It maybe provides some more flexibility in terms of the type of tinkering that they can do. So I think the more competition, the better is ultimately our position. It's not like absolute one or the other.
Sure, and spread your bets a little bit. It's never great to have be completely dependent on some other company for your business. I wanted to ask you also about, I guess. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I guess, well, you and I were talking about this backstage a little bit. Sometimes I worry that we're late. And I don't know, Helen, I would have loved to talk to you about this as well. But, 5 years ago, Sam actually came to one of these events. And he was talking, and we were all sort of laughing. And he said, I think I'd asked him, are you going to license this technology? How are you going to make money? And he said, someday I'm going to ask this generally intelligent system how we make money for our investors. And everybody in the audience laughed. And he was like, I know it sounds like an episode of Silicon Valley, but I'm not kidding. I really believe that's going to happen. But he was saying back then, like, we have to regulate things. We've got to regulate things. And there was a lot happening, but people outside of the industry didn't have visibility into that. Now it feels like the chips have fallen to some extent. How are you thinking about things?
I mean, the way that I think about AI policy, perhaps unsurprisingly, I see it as something that you really cannot decouple from competition policy, that we really kind of need to get the competition policy sorted out first. So if we don't have some type of, you look at Europe and the Digital Markets Act, not perfect, but at least they're taking a stab at figuring out how do we curb the most egregious forms of self-preferencing by these large firms. And if we don't do that, then it's pretty easy to see how this plays out. I mean, I looked with some concern at the Apple announcements yesterday, and there are a lot of kind of, actually, this was just talked about with Chair Khan, the memes and the tweet threads about look at all the startups that have been killed by this. And there's an alternate universe where we're embracing interoperability, where we're compelling these firms to stop self-preferencing, and it's better for everybody. It restores. So the answer is, like, it's not too late. I think we can, if we compel the largest gatekeepers to be more interoperable, to stop self-preferencing, then we can move toward more pluralism, which is what the web used to be, and that was a pretty cool time. 15 plus years ago, when I originally moved out to San Francisco, it felt like there was promise and potential in lots of little companies. Gary was here a couple weeks ago in Washington, and he said, "I'd much rather see 1,000 unicorns than a single another $1 trillion company." And I think that's possible, but we have to do all we can to nurture founders, to compel the largest gatekeepers to interoperate and stop self-preferencing. Once we do that, I think it's really incredible potential for and protect open source AI and the ability for people to tinker and build on open source tools. It's going to unleash a ton of innovation.
The problem, though, again, not to be too negative, but you are going up against, these companies now are $1 trillion companies. They are spending hundreds of millions of dollars here. And then there's you and some VCs who are coming in slowly. So how do you fight against this? And who is part of this like loose coalition that you're hopefully forming to fight back against all of that money?
There was a great story over the weekend in the Wall Street Journal about Google and this guy named Joshua Wright, who was at George Mason University. And basically, the TLDR of the story is that he was doing kind of Harvey Weinstein-y stuff at the law school at George Mason, which was very disturbing. But all the while, he's just getting. He was before, during, and after he was served as an FTC commissioner. He was being paid to essentially use GMU to launder these ideas from the companies that were defending their abuses of dominance as like legit academic things, and it just talked about this pernicious corruption, and ultimately, Amazon, Facebook, Google were paying him millions of dollars a year. There are lots of characters, not the Weinstein-y stuff, but there are lots of characters in Washington that are this type of corruption is quite pernicious. What I'm excited about, what I think YC brings to the table, is the ability to tell the authentic stories of these founders. And I'm not kidding when I say 11,000 founders were connected to virtually every congressional district in the United States. I've seen, if you can tell an authentic story, that means a whole lot more than some AstroTurf front group that is purporting to represent the interests of small businesses or startups. And there are tons of groups that exist, basically, that are propped up by the large companies to push that. And sometimes, they're pushing things that everybody agrees with, like the immigration thing I was mentioning. But a lot of times, it's sort of they're trying to get the chickens to vote for Colonel Sanders. And I think that if we can, be that authentic voice, you actually don't need to spend a lot of money. The authenticity is just like this incredible coefficient I found in Washington for moving the needle. And it's not like we're not going to spend money. We're going to definitely invest resources here. We're going to be, heavily engaged. We don't need to spend the $300 million that big tech spent to kill ICOA in the last Congress. I think we can win with a lot less.
And your network effects are so considerable. You'll definitely be hearing much more about Y Combinator soon, if not already. Luther, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
You are a rock star for doing this, and thank you all for sitting here and spending your night with us. We have more drinks and more food in the back, so please stick around and do some networking. Thank you.